Welcome back to the show. This is Green Fix, and tonight on our Big Why, we are asking you a very simple question. President Donald Trump says climate change is the greatest con job. What are your thoughts on this? Once again, President Donald Trump, the President of the United States of America, has said climate change is the greatest con job. What are your thoughts on this? Do you agree? Do you disagree to his opinion? We would absolutely love to hear from you. You can find us on social media. You can look for us at TV47 Kenya. You can WhatsApp us. You can also text us and give in your thoughts on this very bold statement by President Donald Trump. All right. Moving on swiftly, we'd like to move on to our world. All right, now as Uganda prepares to pump its first oil next year, researchers and environmental activists are calling for stronger safeguards to protect the environment from risks linked to oil production. At the heart of debate is the East African crude oil. Here's that story.
As Uganda prepares to produce its first oil, researchers and environmentalists are calling for concerted efforts to protect the environment from the risks that may arise during oil production.
And I've also observed that, of course, there's been disruption on the environment. They had to do a lot of extraction, excavations, displacing households, cutting trees to put up the different infrastructure. That includes the roads, that includes the infrastructure for the oil development. And so there must be concerted effort, deliberate efforts to ensure that the environment is catered for in terms of vegetation cover.
Uganda discovered crude oil wells 20 years ago in the Alberton Graben, but production was delayed due to lack of infrastructure for oil extraction. However, there has been growing concerns, especially between oil companies and environmentalists, who warn of the dangers that could arise from the project.
And more effort should be put on conserving ecosystem resources and restoring what we have already degraded. That's why I can now even ask you, you see, since 2004, up to now, you are counting around 17, 18, 19 years. Do you know even a 2-acre forest cover that it was put up by the oil companies? Do you know a 1 square mile wetland that it was restored by these oil companies? The answer is no.
Environmental NGOs like National Association of Professional Environmentalists and others have been involved in legal challenges against the project, both at the East African Court of Justice and through its allies at the court in France.
Serving nature than going to degrade nature to go into these dirty energy fossils that are being fought across the entire globe, that are being seen with the evidence that they are the ones that are worsening climate change. We can conserve our nature, we can earn all the revenue we want if we protect and conserve the good, beauty, natural resources that we have in the country.
Good. But also very importantly, that soil at the end of the project will be brought back. Remember, we're not picking soil from anywhere. because we want to maintain the authentic nature of the vegetation here. So the same soil that was excavated from here will be brought, and studies have been done. The same vegetation that was here, like you're saying in the outskirts, will be here, because we're going to reclaim it to near normalcy, like where we have been.
Our environmental performance is guided by the national laws and regulations, and as well the environment and social impact assessment that was done for this, the Kingfisher development area, which helped us to assess the possible impact, such that the best mitigation measures can be input within our operations.
Uganda expects to produce at least 230 barrels of oil per day, as Linet Naiga, an oil drilling engineer at Sinok, Uganda, explains.
And then also we have estimated the quantities of oil that we expect to be in our reservoirs. So now when you do a calculation of for the entire Ugandan reservoirs so far that are under development, the production rate per day is 230,000 barrels per day.
To control the impacts of oil extraction, waste management facilities have been established. Luwero Waste Management Facility is one that is responsible for cleaning and disposing of oil waste at Kingfisher Oil Refinery.
Yeah, so we have two thermal desorption units that handle the solid waste. So basically what happens there is we heat this waste to 700 degrees, and at that temperature the base oil and the water vaporize out of it. So the base oil is sent back to Sinok for use. The wastewater is taken to the water treatment facility, and the solid material is taken to the landfill for stabilization.
Discharge effluent, which is generated from our operations, it is treated by the treatment plants, which have been engineered to that purpose. But also we make sure that this effluent, before it is discharged, it is tested and confirmed that it complies with the national environment discharge regulations to discharge on water or land.
Despite these efforts, researchers warn about the ecological risks, especially to aquatic ecosystems, and call for more collaboration between researchers, oil companies, and the Uganda Petroleum Authority.
These fossil fuels are dirty technologies which produce a lot of carbon. So we are trying to see, because remember, there is no way for us at the Environment for Development, we can say, no, we have to preserve environment, there is no need of exploiting our resources. No. But how can we exploit our resources in such a way that carbons are reduced, carbons are minimized?
Those who think oil can be mined sustainably are just daydreamers, because whereas they talk about that, they cannot give a vivid example where there has been a success story in oil mining. Even these big countries in Europe, in the US, when we go to these international commitments, they are ring-fenced as the highest polluters.
Uganda's crude oil is waxy and solidifies at room temperature, requiring constant heating using electricity along the entire EACOP route, making it the longest heated oil pipeline in the world. This raises further concerns about the project's long-term climate and environmental footprint. The East African Crude Oil Pipeline Project EACOP is the world's longest heated oil pipeline, stretching 1,443 kilometers from Uganda to Tanzania's coast of Tanga. Sada Mubale, TV47, Kampala.
All right, welcome, of course, to this very interesting conversation that we are going to be having with our panel. And with me today, I have Eunice Njau, founder, Eden Climate Center. We also have Tobias Bell, Communications Kenya Climate Innovation Center, that's KCIC. And we will be discussing all things Kenya's climate agenda. So they're with me in studio. How are you today, both of you?
Thank you.
Feeling good?
Feeling good, thank
I
you.
love your tie. I love the color of your blazer. I can see everyone's looking smart as we discuss serious business.
Oh, yeah.
Or should we say green business?
Yeah,
Green
green
business.
business.
That sounds more like it, right? So today we're going to be touching on Kenya's climate agenda and how basically Kenya, wants countries like the US to pay up, all right? Now, on the contrary, the US president says climate change is fake, and that's one of the things that, of course, was mentioned. But apart from that, there's a lot more that we will be looking into. Now, I'll start off with what you think about President Ruto's speech at the UNGA 80 on climate issues. So we'll start off with you, Tobias.
Thank you very much. President Ruto painted a very bold vision as far as climate action is concerned.
Okay.
He painted the potential in Africa, the potential in Kenya, and he did mention that those who look to the future with vision can see that climate change is not only the greatest existential threat, but also a transformation opportunity for Kenya and for the world, really.
Right.
And that speaks to the huge opportunity of addressing climate change, both at the intersection of innovation and entrepreneurship, and using it to transform society, to transform countries, both to address climate change on the one hand and address development issues on the other.
Okay.
So I would say it painted a picture, an ambitious picture, and it also touched on very pertinent issues around the global financial architecture. It touched on multilateralism. It touched on what Africa needs to do locally to not just complain, but be a solutions provider on matters climate change. So I would say he tried to address most of the pertinent issues that pertain to this particular topic.
All right. And what about you, Eunice? What is your take on President Ruto's speech and views?
I would just add on to what Tobias has mentioned. Specifically, I love the idea of highlighting the achievements of the UN and the purpose it has served over time in human history. And then he went down to saying how now we are at a crossroads, right? And it's important that the UN creates a new structure for itself, specifically bringing in now the African continent, particularly into the seat, and ensuring that we have at least 2 representatives from the African continent. And I loved how he also addressed the issue of the creation of the UN as the Bretton Woods Conference. As a result of the Bretton Woods, what Richard would say, it's the unholy trinity, the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO. So it's important that we restructure the global financial architecture. And that's a huge task, considering that the African community needs to have one voice in order to achieve such a target. Yeah.
And as we speak, do you think that we are divided when it comes to the African voice?
Honestly, that's my opinion would be, to some extent we are.
Okay.
So if we ask all countries from the South Africa to Liberia to Morocco whether they actually agree with the sentiments,
yes,
I'm sure we'd have a divide. Yeah, we're still struggling to implement the ACFA and everything related to it. So we have a long way to go. Yeah.
All right.
That's my opinion.
Now, President William Ruto also noted that for Kenya to be able to implement its NDCs, which is the nationally determined contributions, it will require $56 billion, right? How exactly do you think this implementation is going to be conducted, realistically, in your view, Tobias?
Thank you very much. The figure 56 billion, that's about 7.2 trillion Kenya shillings, if my math serves me correctly.
Approximately.
Yeah, so it is an ambitious goal, and it is captured in Kenya's second set of NDCs from 2031 to 2035. And the NDCs actually breaks it down. This is not a figure that can be achieved from one source, whether it's from external donors or even from government alone. It has to be a blended kind of finance model.
Yes.
And around 19% of that figure is projected to come from catalytic public finance to de-risk investment in the green space, but also a huge component of it, about 81%, is projected to come from the private sector as an investor in this particular space.
Okay.
So looking at the private sector as an engine towards achieving the green transition that Kenya is looking towards. And the Kenya's second NDCs paint a vision of a whole of government, a whole of society approach. Now, this financing is meant to go towards mitigation, it's meant to go towards adaptation, but you realize that a lot of emphasis is being laid on the private sector. From our lived experience, we've seen a lot of potential in the private sector. At KCIC alone, we've supported almost 3,500 green ventures in the country and across the region. Now, these are actual innovations coming out of Kenya, whether it's in clean cooking, whether it's in circular economy, whether it's in climate smart agriculture, whether it's in water, e-mobility and all that. So there's huge potential there.
Right.
And through this sort of blended finance and a whole of society approach, I do think that the ambition is not too far from reach. Yeah.
All right. What about you, Eunice?
I would totally agree with Tobias and add that we have a very strong policy framework, if only we followed it through. So for example, we have the laws which regulate matters to do with climate financing, right? So if counties, for example, streamlined climate change and ensure that the finances which flow, because as Tobias is saying, part of the financing will be locally driven, and some will definitely be internationally driven as well. So for the locally driven financing, can we ensure that our counties, for example, streamline climate change so that the finances is the financing which is released from, for example, national treasury is directed towards realizing the national priorities which we have set in the NDCs. Then secondly, we have the, what do we call it, the Kenya Green Finance Taxonomy, where we aim to ensure that at least the financing also, which is directed from the banks and institutions which lend finances, is directed towards realizing sustainable development projects, right? And so of importance, in order for us to bridge that gap, I think strong leadership, innovation, right, and accountability from the duty bearers as well as the citizens who receive this, who are the recipients of this cash flow, is required so that we can bridge that gap, which the president has already highlighted, and it's in the NDC as well. Yeah.
All right. You mentioned climate financing from international donors, of course, from the global community. Do you think that the goodwill still exists towards climate financing in Kenya, being a third world country?
Well, I would say that, first of all, relying on goodwill is not a good strategy.
Okay.
Because if you listen to what the president said and what the fact is, when he mentioned about the Bretton Woods institutions like the IMFs and the World Bank, and the fact that these were, established as reconstruction vehicles for post-war Europe and America. And this ecosystem and these structures have stayed decades and centuries later. That means that it mostly does not serve developing countries and poor countries. If you look at the debt matrix, if you look at the cost of credit for African countries and developing countries, it's much higher, it's much more expensive, and it has been a challenge to access external climate financing for most of these countries. That is not to say that it is all gloom and doom. We have seen a lot of global partnerships, global coming together of different institutions, different countries, but goodwill is not enough. What I would say is we need a very deliberate shift from aid to alliance, aid to investment, so that Africa and most of the developing countries in the global south are not just seen as passive recipients of aid, but investment opportunities. This way we get to balance the scale. And I would say that the opportunity in the developing countries is massive. It's huge, just by some of the innovations and the enterprises that we were mentioning earlier. So that needs to change. But at the same time, we have to also prioritize locally led development.
Yes.
At the end of the day, we have to take charge of our own development. And the president talked about Africa not just being a victim, but a solutions provider. That needs to move from rhetoric to action. So we want to see more political will. She mentioned about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. There's a lot of political will that needs to go into that. There's a lot of accountability mechanisms that needs to be built. And from the second Africa Climate Summit recently, we saw a lot of positive move in that direction with the pledging of around 100 billion by African multilateral financial institutions towards African green industrialization, which is a good step in the right direction, but that needs to be followed on with a lot of action, a lot of goodwill to put this into action. So I would address it at that.
So we'll just hold on to that thought as we explain to everyone watching at home, our viewers, and just break it down for you. So we're going to be breaking down the Kenyan climate agenda, the figures, of course. We'll have the figures running on the screen. You know, 56 billion USD is the amount required to implement Kenya's new NDCs. Now, 300 billion USD is the amount of money that developed countries should mobilize per year for developing countries. There is 62 billion USDs, that is the amount of money that Kenya projected will be required for mitigation and adaptation actions across sectors up to 2030. And the source of that is the Ministry of Environment, 2020. Now let's go on to Kenya's climate agenda. Kenya's 2020 to 2030 NDC. In case you don't know what NDC is, it's the Nationally Determined Contributions, that's NDC, National Climate Action Plans, by each country under the Paris Agreement. So they sought to abate greenhouse gases emissions by 32% by 2030, and this is in line with Kenya's Sustainable Development Agenda through a low carbon and climate resilient development pathway. Mitigation activities included in the NDC are: 1, increasing of renewables in the electricity generation mix of the national grid, the enhancement of energy and resource efficiency across the different sectors, as well as now the achievement of a tree coverage of at least 10% of the country land area, and lastly, the achievement of land degradation neutrality. Right, so remember, this is, a few things, a few figures for you to be able to understand better on what exactly Kenya's climate agenda is. Right, we're having a conversation in studio with my guests, and we'll continue to do that. Now we'll be moving over to you, Eunice, and ask you the same question with regards to, among the nationally determined contributions that were signed in 2020. And of course, among others, former Environment CS Keriako Tobiko was to achieve a tree coverage of at least 10% of the country land area by 2030. Now, 5 years since the NDC was signed, what do you say has been the progress on this?
I would say we have worked towards achieving that in line with Article 69, right, which requires at least to get at least 10% of minimum tree cover. In 2021, we realized that we had slacked a bit. We were at 8.8%. And in 2022, we were a little bit higher. It was around 12.1 or 12.2%. But as we speak, we know that initiative by the president of ensuring that we have the 15 billion tree cover, right? So the challenge, I think, in my opinion, is we have very good numbers and targets and aspirations, but in terms of monitoring and identifying the tree covers which we have and ensuring that there's spatial equality, because as it is, we have the spatial inequality. It depends with which school you joined, the spatial inequality where there's some counties which are well endowed with all sorts of tree covers compared to other counties, for example, in the northern regions. So if we could identify a way of balancing that spatial inequality. And it would go down to what Tobias was explaining earlier on matters to do with climate finance, and also ensuring that that particular department, the State Department for Forestry, has been allocated sufficient funds, and also the officers who are in charge of monitoring that are also equipped well in terms of monitoring, and not only just tree planting, but also ensuring the growth and continuity of the particular trees which have been planted. Yeah. What do you think, Tobias? Yeah, that's my opinion.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to come back to you, Tobias. But before that, I want you both to listen in to what President William Ruto had to say. Of course, his speech, I'm sure you've watched it, I'm sure you've heard it at the UN on climate issues. So we've got that particular bite.
We declared Africa not just as a victim of the crisis, but as a source of solutions, with climate action driving economic growth, transformation, and job creation for our communities. Ambition, ladies and gentlemen, cannot stand on willpower alone. Implementing our new NDCs will require $56 billion. That is why we call on the global community to unlock the $300 billion agreed at Baku, and to accelerate negotiations towards the new $1.3 trillion goal under the Baku-Belém roadmap. Without affordable finance and without reform of the international financial architecture, the promise of climate action in Africa will remain constrained.
All right, of course, and that is President Ruto talking about climate issues today, regarding what his thoughts are when it comes to climate action, when it comes to the NDCs, when it comes to Kenya's climate agenda. Tobias, what do you make of that once again, now that we've watched it together? Anything else that you would like to add on to it?
Absolutely. What I would I agree with him completely, that we need to shift the narrative from seeing Africa just as a victim.
Yes.
And for a very long time in any climate conversation, the cliche statement normally goes, Africa is the least contributor, but mostly affected by climate change. So it's just, we've almost always just been crying wolf.
Yeah.
But we are not entirely at a disadvantage, because we can get to take charge of this development. And I'll shift back to the opportunity in the private sector.
Yes.
We have seen Kenyan innovators, most of them young people, coming up with different solutions to combat climate change. In clean energy, in climate smart agriculture, an entity like eRehab, doing a lot in terms of climate smart irrigation to shield farmers from the wheels of climate change and all that. We've seen a company like Jijenge turning plastic into concrete.
Yes.
We've seen a tech-integrated company in Kisumu like Mtaka trying to address climate change in the lakeside town. We've seen companies like Gary Holdings in Eldoret looking at organic fertilizer. And these are solutions that are homegrown. These are solutions that speak to our lived experiences and our lived challenges.
Right.
There's a lot of work that needs to be done on the adaptation space, especially for Kenya and most of the developing countries. And I would say that the opportunity is there.
Okay.
And Africa and Kenya has to shift and present itself as an investment destination when it comes to the continent's green transition, rather than a passive recipient of aid and handouts, because that perpetual cycle will not get us out of the problem.
Noted.
Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you so much for that. Right, I'm going to move over to you, Eunice, and maybe you can tell us what your take is when it comes to the NDCs that we are seeing now. How are they different from those that have been there in the past?
Okay, so first and I think for these particular NDCs,
yes,
we have an approach where we are bringing on board the entire community and the country. So there's a lot of inclusivity.
Okay.
And there's also the aspect of gender, bringing in women who have also been affected in the past. And there's also inclusivity in terms of the children. So the voices of children and youth have been were actually sought prior to during the preparation, even before the presentation of the NDCs. We also see that it is in line with the National Climate Change Action Plan 2023-2027, and one of the priority areas which we have set as a country is ensuring that children and youth, who are the owners, the architects of innovation, as Tobias is rightly saying, are brought into place and are included in the decision-making processes. So I would say that is one thing which actually stands out, that the recognition of children and youth. Then secondly, it has also strongly pronounced itself on matters to do with renewable energy,
right,
and the opportunity which we as a country have in terms of bringing on board investments in that particular space, as well as climate smart agriculture. So that is 2 or 3 things which I can mention with regard to this particular NDC. Yeah.
Okay. What about you, Tobias? What do you think, stands out for you, and how do you think it is different in comparison to those that we've had in the past?
Well, I would say, one, our very first NDC was mostly reliant on international support in terms of financing. We are seeing a shift from in this new set of NDCs, in the sense that we are trying to catalyze and incentivize local support towards the NDCs, and the embracing of a whole society approach. If that can actually be achieved,
right,
the recognition that we need to take a systems approach to it, the cross-sectoral coordination of these efforts, it would be a game changer, because climate change does not manifest in silos. It cuts across different sectors. With good renewable energy, you get to affect and positively influence agriculture. You get to influence health. You get to influence all these different sectors.
Right.
So this whole of society approach would really go a long way, but also incentivizing local engagement, the private sector, the catalytic public finance to address some of these challenges. So I would say that that would really be a game changer in this conversation.
Okay.
Yeah.
And lastly, as we wrap up, do you think that there's enough awareness when it comes to climate financing, especially in this country, in Kenya, where people really are still trying to understand the effects of climate change? We've come a long way from, what the current situation was from back in the day. I think a decade on, we've seen that there's more awareness. People are now more versed with climate issues, with the fact that climate action needs to happen. So do you think that we have still made progress and we are in a place where you can safely say that people understand what climate financing is?
Honestly, I don't think we have reached there yet. In terms of the knowledge gap, it still exists. Professor Moho, whom I like quoting, indicates that despite the fact that we have agriculture, geography being taught in schools, and climate-related knowledge is being delivered in classrooms, what still lacks is that bit on how do we apply this knowledge into the outside world. So in terms of knowledge gap on matters to do with climate financing itself, it exists. And that is where institutions like Eden Climate Center, we come in. We focus on children and youth and try to equip them with skills. Not really try, we actually do equip them with skills, and the climate innovation skills and climate tech skills and policy skills, and bring them together so that they can recreate solutions suited for them. As I was mentioning earlier, we saw how I was mentioning the National Climate Change Action Plan, and how the government has set targets of ensuring that, for example, that we have a children and youth engagement strategy, whereby we have a framework of involving children across the 47 counties. Imagine if we achieved that. And also bringing on board advocacy strategies of ensuring that children are aware about these climate finance opportunities Tobias is addressing today. So that is why institutions like Eden Climate Center, we exist to bridge the gap between the government and the community, and to ensure that the knowledge that exists at the top level. So for example, when the Green Climate Fund last year at COP indicated that finances have been flowing into the developing world, and we have over 133 projects being undertaken in the developing countries. How many children, though, in Kibera, in Kilifi, are aware of even Green Climate Fund? How many children in Mlolongo or deep in Kwale County are aware of the existence of the institution which Tobias is operating from? So smaller institutions like us, we come in to bridge that gap here, and I hope at some point 10 years to come, when we have a matrix of measuring, do we have an engagement strategy? Yes, of engaging children in matters to do with climate policy. If we do, then we can do that to monitor in terms of how many children have accessed funding, how many children have engaged in policy making processes. Then we will answer that question maybe, yeah?
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, so I'd like you to just listen in to what President Trump had to say regarding the greatest con job, which is climate change. And yeah, let's just listen into his views.
Entire globalist concept of asking successful industrialized nations to inflict pain on themselves and radically disrupt their entire societies must be rejected completely and totally, and it must be immediate. That's why in America I withdrew from the fake Paris Climate Accord, where, by the way, America was paying so much more than every country. Others weren't paying. China didn't have to pay until 2030. Russia was given an old standard that was easy to meet, a 1990 standard. But for the United States, we're supposed to pay like $1 trillion. And I said, this is another scam. The fact is, the United States has been taken advantage of by the world for many, many years, but not any longer, as you probably noticed. From 5,000 to 7,000 dead. In closing, I just want to repeat that immigration and the high cost of so-called green renewable energy is destroying a large part of the free world and a large part of our planet.
All right, Tobias, thoughts on that as we close?
I'm going to give you my thoughts on that. Just allow me a second to weigh in on the previous question on awareness,
okay.
If I may. And to start with, I have to congratulate you and the Media House for such a program on Green Fix.
Thank you very
because that is where the conversation on awareness comes from. A lot of what we consume in society still comes from media. And for a very long time, the conversation about climate change has been almost done in apocalyptic terms. When you think about climate change, the media shows you, scorched earth and, degrees and temperatures and all that. And it's almost like a threat when the conversation is made. By this year, you're not going to be able to do this and that. And generally, people don't like to feel incompetent. You know, when you bombard them with a lot of technical jargon and all that, people do not get to take action at the end of the day. There has been a missed opportunity in showing the opportunities that are there, in showing what's working, some of these innovations that we are talking about. And that's why that conversation needs to shift. We need to demystify what climate change is and do exactly what we are doing here today and make people understand that this manifests across society.
Right.
In low yields, in prolonged drought, in dying animals and all that. So that conversation needs to be there. And the opportunity for climate investment, the opportunity for enterprises in this space is massive. If you allow me, next month we are bringing together different investors and enterprises in the climate space for an investment summit to just explore the opportunity across these different sectors. And that tells you of the massive chance that we have to fix this.
Okay.
Now, to weigh in on the video that we've just played.
Very quickly.
Yes. Now, climate change, as we mentioned earlier, is an existential threat, and it is a global conversation. And of course, everyone has a right to weigh in and give in their opinion, whether political or otherwise. But for us as a country, and for a farmer somewhere in Turkana who lost 40 herds of cattle because of a prolonged drought, or for a family staying in the coast whose home have been swept because of rising sea level,
Naivasha as well.
Naivasha as well, you cannot tell them that it is a hoax, because it is a lived reality. It is a lived experience.
Yeah.
For homes that have always being where they are, being swept with floods and all that, you cannot tell them that this is not happening.
I mean, Americans too, because of the wildfires that we saw very recently.
Precisely.
It's a reality.
So I understand that this is a sensitive conversation because the hard decisions that need to be made touch on economics. You know, that's why we talk about fair transition in terms of energy transition and all that. So yes, there are certain issues that are there, but for us, I would say we talk about the opportunity that is here and what we need to do beyond the political rhetoric and ask ourselves, what do we need to do to have that green transition? Of course, the rhetoric at that level beats and challenges the efforts that are being made, but I would say that we still have a chance to do what's right.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. And of course, I really do appreciate the fact that we are having this conversation in studio, bringing awareness and trying to demystify things when it comes to climate change, climate action, and of course, Kenya's climate agenda. With me in studio, I've been having Eunice Njau, the founder of Eden Climate Center, as well as Tobias Bell, Communications Kenya Climate Innovation Center, that's KCIC, as we have been discussing Kenya's climate agenda. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope to continue having such conversations with you in future.
Thank you for having us.
All right.
Moving
on, it's time for Green Warriors, where in Meru County, a new innovation is currently helping farmers cut down on harmful pesticide use while boosting their yields. Muchuma Muriuki, the founder of EcoBristo, had designed a solar-powered insect trap that uses light to lure pests, which then fall into soapy water. The environmentally friendly device is being embraced by local farmers who say it is safer, cheaper, and more effective than chemical sprays. This week on Green Warriors, Stanley Nyaringita brings us the story of how Muriuki's solution is transforming agriculture in Meru.
Here in Kathurine, Meru County, I meet up with Mutuma Muriuki as he inspects these traps, which use solar-powered LED lights to attract pests during low-light periods.
So this is the gadget, and then the light. The light comes through this gadget here.
Muriuki, the founder of EcoBristo, a company he began in 2022, explains to me that once the pests are drawn to the light, they are captured and contained in soapy water, effectively reducing pest populations without the need for harmful chemicals.
So this has been a long time coming, and given that I was in the industry, I was working in different sectors in the industry. It was an idea that was growing, because currently the closest that we have is the use of just simple light at night. So from there now, I decided to innovate around that, so that you can have a particular wavelength that is produced here, and that will not use the grid, so hence the use of solar. So that at the end of the day, the farmer is able to have a gadget that is simple enough to use, install, and maintain. So it has been an interesting conversation because with some of my colleagues, because ideally it was not an event. It was not an event. It was a process.
Muriuki notes that the solar panel coverage of the traps is 1 acre. He says it mostly attracts the fruit flies, aphids, white flies, as well as the false codling moth, or FCM. With a beaming smile, Muriuki narrates that the trap will self-activate at sunrise and at sunset, which means that when darkness creeps in, the trap has a sensor to sense darkness and produces intensive blue light.
The blue wavelength is able to capture the different types of moths. So ideally, what we have as a pest in the farm are different species of moths that have been affecting our crops. Not just the avocado, but the whole of horticultural value chain, including the flowers. So they usually come out at night. So this gadget is able to eradicate them from around 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. That's when they come out. And then also we try to prevent the problem that we are currently having of eradicating the beneficial organisms like the bees and the butterflies. So this gadget is specific to the moth at night and leaves out the bees that pollinate our crops during the day.
This solar trap in Meru County is one among many. Believe it or not, it has helped farmers reduce pests by 80%.
We have different types of beetles also that affect our farms.
Muruki has so far worked with at least 200 farmers. This is after he got a grant of 1 million Kenyan shillings in 2023 by the Haifa's Agriculture, Youth and Technology Ayuta program. Kinywang Kanata, a small-scale farmer here, admits that since he started using this innovation in 2022, he has improved on avocado yields. His best avocado tree has had 2,500 pieces.
Very tiny fruit will start attracting, it's like we are growing food for the FCM. Once you plant avocados, you have already brought food for this FCM. So they will be attacked from very, very early stage. Okay, from flowering to fruit maturity is about 7 to 8 months. So you can get attacks even at the first and second month of your fruit formation. So that is why we need to be careful throughout all the stages.
Kinyo further encourages farmers to embrace the environmentally friendly practice in what will also help understand the prevalence of these pests. Stanley Nyaringita, TV47.
Switched to one.
All right, and tonight in Climate News, Kenya's technical and vocational education and training institutions have pledged to plant 5 million trees by the end of this year. According to Gibson Gumi, Senior Technical Officer in charge of greening and climate change, the initiative will not only support the presidential target of 15 billion trees by 2032, but it'll also boost the coastal marine ecosystem.
Our target as a State Department this year is to plant at least 5 million trees. Last year we were able to plant 2 million trees. The other year we were able to plant 5 million trees. So we are on course to be able to meet and even exceed our target. And we believe that we are not just doing this because we are not just doing this for the sake of doing it, but we are doing this for the sake of the sustainability of our environment, the sustainability of our blue economy, the sustainability of our general economy as a whole.
Tunazingatia skills in the marine ecosystem. Kwa hivyo Msambweni TVC kama other TVET institutions tuko na courses ambazo even in the mainstream, even in the other courses, tuko na kuzingatia, kusensitize na kuinform our trainees katika umuhimu wa mazingira na greening na clean energy.
Tumefika kwa beach hapa kusafisha, sababu ukiangalia kwa beach kuna samaki ambao kuna vitu ambavyo havistahili kuwa kwenye bahari, kama kuna some plastics ambazo they can't decompose, so zinasababisha samaki maybe haziwezi zikasurvive kwa maji.
Na tukizingatia kwa awali programu hii kwa challenge sana, basi round hii imeletwa kwetu kama vijana, imeweza kusaidia tuachane na hizi starehe za anasa sana na kutumika kama vijana wote kuanza kufanya usafi, kwani usafi huu unazingatia afya yetu.
Now, as climate and sustainability challenges deepen across Africa, Ghana is emerging with homegrown solutions rooted in culture and creativity. One of the most inspiring comes from Renee Neblet, fondly known as Auntie Renee, whose project at the Cockrobaiti Institute is turning waste into fashionable, sustainable textiles by blending African knowledge systems with modern design. Her initiative is offering both environmental solutions and economic opportunities. Suzanne Locho now reports.
In the edge of Accra, in the coastal town of Cockrobaiti, a quiet revolution is unfolding. In this in-depth story, we meet Renee Neblett, affectionately known to locals as Auntie Renee, who is leading a pioneering effort to transform post-consumers waste into sustainable textiles. Drawing on traditional knowledge and values, Neblett is working to build what she calls environmental literacy to foster self-reliance and improve social well-being.
My name is Renee Neblett, and I'm the founding director of Kokrovite Institute, an educational institute dedicated to researching traditional Ghanaian African knowledge systems as they relate to sustainability, or better said, to economic and social development.
Having first arrived in Kokrobite over 30 years ago, she recalls being inspired by the community's profound, though often overlooked, connection to the natural world.
You know, to watch this environment become littered with waste, you know, I realized that caring about the environment had to be extended to looking at the devastation. So how could you address some of this waste?
Originally conceived as a means to enrich students' understanding of Africa, Neblett's project has since evolved into a platform for applying Africa's knowledge system to address the continent's deepening environmental crisis. Faced with mounting waste and environmental degradation, Renee Neblett made a conscious decision to find a way to create something meaningful out of what others discarded.
And now I know that a fundamental literacy is the ability to read your environment, to know that what nature gives you and what you're obliged to give it in return, and that's what I found here.
Whether it was textile, necklace, or other handcrafted items, her goal was to transform nature and waste into beauty and utility.
We started out using plastic water sachets and advertising banners. You know, the first project we did was making a school bag for children out of the advertising banners. And then as the textile waste became a larger issue, we started looking at ways to take that waste and to create a product. With the pre-consumer textile waste, we just bring in a lot of it from the factory and getting different colors, so there'll be a real variety. And they were fooling around with the turmeric.
Driven by a deep desire to make lasting change, Renee Neblett knows that true impact cannot happen in isolation, and she believes that collaboration is essential and is actively seeking to work with both governmental and private organizations to scale solutions and build long-term systems.
Outside of that kind of, as I said, international governmental organizations, there are a lot of private organizations that I think are doing some sincere work. I'm working with Landfills to Landmarks here. I work with Like-Minded Objects. We have partners in Australia. We work with people in Santa Fe. We work with groups, and we're trying to reach out to the Parley Foundation, Ciro Parley in Berlin.
The Kokrobite Institute Sustainable Design Studio is now a hub of innovation. Among her proudest achievements is the AC sweater crafted entirely from post-consumer textile scraps.
This is t-shirt, isn't it?
Yes, t-shirt.
So you get it really lovely to create these strips. She has a passion for weaving and knitting. And she saw some potential in this. And we said, okay, let's try XYZ. And it just kind of evolved. And
as Ghana faces a deepening environmental crisis, Neblett's initiative offers both a hopeful vision and a practical model, blending culture, sustainability, and empowerment to build a greener, more resilient future.
We're playing. We're playing with different fibers and materials, but we want to start integrating some of the, stuff comes from the environment. All these plants, the sisal plant, the banana plant, these are all fibers. When I first came to Kokrobite, I used to watch the local fishermen, the local people cut down that sisal plant and scrape the flesh off of it and pull the fiber out and twist it into yarn. There's so many Where's the brown people? There's so much. People are making wigs now out of the banana fiber.
The UNGA General Debates, Ghana and its African counterparts are expected to emphasize the need for fair climate finance mechanism, technology transfer, and equitable solutions that account for Africans' disproportionate vulnerability despite contributing minimally to global greenhouse emissions. Susan Locho for TV47 GreenFix.
All right, of course, and with that, we basically asked you today on our Big Why a very simple question, and I'm going to remind you of it, where President Trump said climate change is the greatest con job. Do you agree? So we have views that have come in from Thomas Nderito, CEO, Community Organization for Positive Impact Care and Development, that's Copycat, and let's listen into what he had to say.
My name is Thomas Nderito, CEO Copycat. I'm an environmentist. That is, I conserve an environment in Nyandarua County. I'm in charge of environment. I'm a hero about environment conservation. Now, I can't support Donald Trump about saying that this climate change is fake. One thing that we can see the effects. Tunaona janga ambayo imetendeka kwa mambo ya hali ya anga. Kwa sababu ya kwamba watu walipokata miche yote, tulipata ya kwamba hata hapa kwetu sasa, hapa pahali ambapo nipo mimi saa hizi, utapata ya kwamba kuna lake ambayo inaitwa Lake Olbosat. Tangia kitambo kidogo hakukuwa watu wakikosa maji. There was enough water. Water was plenty. There were no season liver. Today, zile mito zote zinateremka kwenda pale ziwani. Unapata kwamba zote zinakauka. Wakati mwaka ukifika zinakauka. Lake yenyewe inakauka. Kichaka, fires inaendelea kuwa, moto zinaendelea kuwa pale. Sisi wenyewe tumechukua jukumu ya kuona ya kwamba tunaendelea kuzingatia mambo ya mazingira. Ni kwa sababu nini? Sisi lishe bora imekosa. Umepata ya kwamba climate imeharibu mpaka mambo ya mazingira. Hakuna chakula. Kitambo kidogo tulikuwa na chakula cha kutosha. Sasa hakuna chakula. Kwa sababu ya nini? Kwa sababu ya kuadhiriwa na mambo ya mazingira. Kwa hivyo ningependa kusimama hapa na kusema ya kwamba climate change is real. Imefanyika. Tumeona hata kwamba mito imekwisha, mambo mengi imetendeka, chakula kimekosa kwa sababu ya mambo ya mazingira na hali ya mazingira kuharibika.
All right, and with that, it's time for us to say goodbye to you and wrap it up. Thank you so much for tuning in. It has been an absolute pleasure keeping you informed, entertained, and of course, educated when it comes to all things politics, business, sports, sustainability, climate action, and so much more. Every Thursday from 9 p.m. onwards, we tell you all the stories that are untold, especially when it comes to climate action, only on TV47's GreenFix. I am Shiksha Arora. Goodbye from the entire team tonight. We hope you had a great time watching the show, and we hope that you learned a thing or two. I'll be with you tomorrow on Tribe 47. We shift gears to entertainment, so make sure you tune in as we get that weekend fever going. You stay safe and sleep tight. Shiksha Arora signing out. Bye.